Mind, Before and After the Way of Righteousness, a collection of the Prologue, the Epilogue, with photo essay, and the Summations of the Way of Righteousness. Read by its author, William John Cox. Copyright 2019. Dedication. For my mother, Minnie Irene Oswalt Cox, who has walked with me every step of the way. Prologue. What happened before the Way of Righteousness was written? My mother went to the hospital for female surgery in January 1946, the month before my 5th birthday. On the day my father left to bring her home, he told my older sisters to clean the house, and they told me to take a nap. When my father returned, I could hear him through the closed door telling my sisters that our mother had died that morning. As I listened to their wails of grief, I began to search through my mind for the sense of what I was hearing. Living on a farm, I had seen death, but it was difficult to comprehend the meaning of the fact that my mother was never coming home. I pretended to sleep for the remainder of that day and that night as I lay alone, seeking answers to my questions. Self-awareness arose within me on that long and sad day, and although I have now become old and wrinkled, that lost and lonely little boy named Billy Jack remains inside of me, looking out, thinking about the world and we who inhabit it, and telling stories. My father took me, the youngest of his 8 children, to his bed to sleep. He would often read dime Western novels at night, and when I became bored with looking at the book covers, he taught me to read. Cotton farming had been profitable during the war, and electricity had just been extended to the farm, supplanting the kerosene lamps we used for lighting. Indoor plumbing was being installed, and our workhorses were replaced with a gasoline tractor. Each day, I stood beside my father on the tractor axle, clinging to the seat as he plowed the fields of our West Texas dryland farm, and I washed the red dirt off his feet each evening in a pan of water beside the bed. My father told me to take a bath one evening as the principal of our country school was coming to visit. As I lay in the bathtub, I fell asleep listening to them conspire in the next room to enroll me in the 1st grade that fall, using my father's August birthday instead of my own. Even though I was a year younger than the other students in my class, I already knew how to read and quickly worked my way through the school's small collection of books. A lonely child, I read everything I could to escape the bleakness of rural life on the semi-arid Great State Plains, including my father's secret Masonic text. Following his death and that of my last remaining grandparent when I was 10, I withdrew even further into books and read the Bible several times, searching for a description of God and a purpose for my lonely existence. I found comfort in our small Methodist church, and I was baptized under the large painting of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. I thought about becoming a minister. Living with my married brothers and sisters, I turned away from the church toward the open road and became a habitual runaway. After stealing my brother-in-law's car and heading for the hill country of central Texas, I was arrested and declared a ward of the court. Following military school, where I was sent as a condition of probation, I joined the Navy when I was 17 to see the world. Instead, I served out my enlistment as a medical corpsman at the San Diego Navy Hospital. I was married, fathered 3 children, became a police officer, completed community college, and ended my marriage amid a deep emotional depression. My career in the police profession continued as I transferred to the Los Angeles Police Department. Needing a birth certificate for the first time, I discovered my name had never been filled in. I named myself William John. I attended law school while I wrote the policies and philosophy of the LAPD and the role of the police in America for President Nixon's National Advisory Commission on Criminal Justice Standards and Goals. Following a year in Washington, D.C., working for the Justice Department, implementing national criminal justice standards, I returned to Los Angeles to serve as a deputy district attorney. Living at the beach for several years and enjoying the freedoms offered by the 70s, I spent a long, lazy summer considering the direction of my life. As I reflected on everything I'd read in the Bible and compared it to what I had learned about life, I regained a belief in the historical Jesus and his essential message, which I had earlier lost. At about this same time, I began to reread the journals I'd kept over the years and realized that I had not always been honest with myself. I resolved to discard the evasions and to retain the truth, much of which had been written as poetry. I published the remnants in Hello, We Speak the Truth, which was my earliest attempt to examine and express the consciousness I experience within my own mind. It is divided into 3 parts: when, now, and then. To be what you thought, and I wished I was, would be to be what I'm not, because I am what I am and not what I'm not. But that's no reason I can't be what I want. For not is now, and then is when. I will myself change now and then, not to be what I'm not, but to be what I want. Differentiating between a belief in an historical Jesus who was loving and forgiving and the existence of an all-powerful, judgmental God, the book also included this little poem. I dreamed of a God in the sky one night. He was a schoolboy who had erected an experiment we called the universe on his bedroom desk. He was occasionally chastised by his father for failing to better care for that he had created, but most of the time he neither noticed nor remembered. I awoke from my dream and found that I could never again believe in a God in the sky. In writing about Jesus in Hello, I made what I later concluded to be the one error I would have avoided had I greater knowledge at the time. I said, if only Jesus had learned to write, there wouldn't have been others to confuse his might. I'm now convinced that Jesus could not only write, but that he was probably literate in multiple languages. I considered returning to school to become a minister, but upon further reflection, I was moved to use my professional legal training to act as a lawyer for Jesus. Uncomfortable with the new assignment of having to prosecute juveniles accused of crimes, I made the decision to open a public interest law practice primarily devoted to the representation of young people and other social, legal, and political matters. Acting on one such issue, the Christmas holidays of 1979 found me in a small West Jerusalem hotel where I had a prophetic dream about the children of the Holocaust. I awoke, dressed, and walked in the pre-dawn hours into the Jaffa Gate, along the narrow streets of the old city, and out the eastern gate into the Kidron Valley. I walked to where Jesus had spent his last night praying in the Garden of Gethsemane and climbed up the Mount of Olives. There I sat on a large stone as the sun rose over the hill behind me to shine down upon the ancient walled city. As the sunlight was reflected from the roofs of the synagogues, churches, and mosques in Jerusalem, this powerful thought occurred to me. Just as the same sun shines on all of the roofs, those within all worship the same God. and there are no footnotes, asterisks, or exceptions to the Ten Commandments. I did not immediately understand all of my experiences in Jerusalem, but the following year my dream became clear when I undertook legal representation of a child of the Holocaust, Mel Mermelstein, a Jewish survivor of Auschwitz. Having committed myself to defending the interest of Jesus, I did not feel I had a choice when given the task of prosecuting those who denied the murder of so many of his family's children, trashed their memory, and harmed survivors by forcing them to relieve their terror. I filed a civil lawsuit against those who denied that the Nazi genocide of European Jewry ever took place, and I spent the next year exposing the dark side of America's radical right-wing politics. The lead defendant was the powerful figure described by the New York Times as a reclusive, behind-the-scenes wizard of the far-right fringe of American politics, who used lobbying and publishing to denigrate Jews and other minorities. The case was resolved favorably in October 1981 when the judge took judicial notice of the fact that Jews were gassed to death at Auschwitz concentration camp in the summer of 1944. The decision was widely reported, and the case became the subject of the motion picture Never Forget. Shortly after the verdict, I returned to Israel to investigate some unresolved issues. While there, I was invited to share morning tea with Prime Minister Menachem Begin, who vowed that never again would Jews be led like sheep to the slaughter. In comprehending the mind-boggling deaths of as many as 80 million people during World War II, the suffering of the little children sometimes gets lost in the magnitude of the horror. In a letter I wrote at the time, I attempted to explain why I had undertaken the Holocaust case. It concluded, "Recently, I was out at Mel's, and he had just received several boxes of artifacts from Auschwitz. As we stood together and looked at the pile of rusty and melted scissors, spoons and forks, and other items taken from the victims and later burned, I saw a small rectangular flat piece of metal which I asked for, and he gave me as a gift. It is the musical note bar of a harmonica. The rest of the instrument has been burned away, and we will never know whose lips were upon it or the songs it played. But I will forever choose to hear in my mind the happy sounds of singing children, too innocent for such death, rather than the screams of their final agony." During a trip associated with my prosecution of the Holocaust case, I visited a bookstore on Fifth Avenue in New York City and purchased a copy of the Gnostic Gospels by Elaine Pagels. Dr. Pagels was a member of the team of biblical scholars that produced the English translation of the Nag Hammadi codices, the Gnostic Gospels. I read her book during my late-night flight back to Los Angeles, and I was excited by the discovery of books about the ministry of Jesus I'd been unaware of. Reading whatever I could on the subject in bookstores and public libraries, I began to search for other historical information about the ministry of Jesus. The Messianic Legacy, a book written by a team of popular writers, mentioned Dr. Robert Eisenman, the director of the Institute for the Study of Judeo-Christian Origins at the California State University in Long Beach near my home. A scholar of Middle East religions, Dr. Eisenman proposed some interesting alternative views about the origins of Christianity based upon his study of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I telephoned Dr. Eisenman, and he agreed to meet. It turned out he was aware of my pro bono work on the Holocaust case and asked if I might be interested in a legal matter concerning the Dead Sea Scrolls. He told a remarkable story. The major scrolls recovered from the first cave at the Dead Sea were quickly published shortly after their discovery in November 1946. But thousands of scroll fragments subsequently discovered had never been published. These were primarily sifted from a thick layer of dust on the floor of Cave 4 that had served as a major library. And they were the remains of more than 900 books. Considered by many to be the greatest manuscript find of all times, the suppression of these documents was called the academic scandal of the 20th century by Dr. Giza Vermes. I was as intrigued by the Dead Sea Scrolls as I had been about the Gnostic Gospels, and by how these newly discovered ancient documents could help answer questions concerning the true ministry of Jesus. I resolved to do everything I could to bring the remaining scrolls to publication and set about to learn all I could about them. The unpublished fragmentary scrolls were primarily purchased with funds provided by the Jordanian government and were housed at the Rockefeller Museum in East Jerusalem. They had come under the control of Catholic Dominican priests associated with the École Biblique, established in 1890 under the Pontifical Biblical Commission to defend the Catholic faith against the threat posed by developments in historical and archaeological research. The head of the commission was Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict, who was also the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, previously known as the Holy Inquisition. Members of the École Biblique operated under the injunction that, at all times, the interpreter must cherish a spirit of ready obedience to the Church's teaching authority. Following the Six-Day War in 1967 and the conquest of East Jerusalem, where the Rockefeller Museum is located, by the Israelis, de facto ownership of the scrolls fragments was claimed by the State of Israel. But the priests of the École Biblique continued to maintain day-to-day control. By 1991, the unpublished scroll fragments had remained unavailable to biblical scholars for almost 50 years. As I researched a legal basis for a lawsuit to compel their publication, it was apparent the potential defendants were very powerful: the Vatican, the Israeli government, and the Rockefeller Foundation. Photographic negatives of the scroll fragments had been deposited for safekeeping at the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati and the Oxford Center for Postgraduate Hebrew Studies in England. These photographs were sequestered, and access was denied to scholars. With funds provided by Mrs. Elizabeth Hay Bechtel and a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, noted manuscript photographer Robert Schlosser of the Huntington Library in San Marino, California, was commissioned and authorized to photograph the scroll fragments in Jerusalem. Upon completion, the new set of almost 1,800 photographs was lodged at the Huntington Library. However, they too were embargoed. Dr. Eisenman had been active in seeking the release of the suppressed photographs, and he and Dr. James M. Robinson, chair of the religious faculty at the Claremont Graduate School, had attempted to publish an unauthorized microfiche set of the Huntington photographs in April 1991 by the scholarly publisher E.J. Brill in Leiden, the Netherlands. The publisher, however, apparently alarmed about legal threats made by representatives of the Israeli government, canceled the agreement. These were the facts I considered as I sought a solution to the problem. There were photographic copies of the suppressed scrolls. However, people were too afraid of litigation to publish them. One day, as I was driving along the ocean on my way to visit my granddaughter in San Diego, I imagined a way to resolve the dilemma. Under still secret circumstances, I arranged to obtain legal possession of a set of the Huntington photographs. Then, acting on behalf of an unidentified client whose identity I have never revealed, I signed a contract with the Biblical Archaeology Society, the BAS, to publish the images. Under the agreement, Professors Robinson and Eisenman, neither of whom was my client, prepared an index of the photographs and wrote an introduction. Prior to publication, it was learned that Herschel Shanks, the president of BAS, intended to include a publisher's foreword documenting his publicity campaign to free the scrolls. He also planned to attach a 120-line Hebrew language transcription of a scroll fragment known as 4QMMT, which had been worked on by Elisha Qimron, an Israeli professor. An earlier attempt by a Polish scholar to distribute the same transcription was blocked by the Israeli Antiquities Authority under a threat of litigation. It was that risk which had caused Brill to cancel the microfiche edition. Believing that the foreword was too journalistic for the academic purpose of the proposed book, Robinson, Eisenman, and I objected to its publication. However, Shanks, as the publisher, had the last word, and his foreword was included. A facsimile edition of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 2 folio-sized volumes was published in November of 1991. With that publication and the contemporary access to the photographic archive granted by the Huntington Library, the monopoly over the scrolls was broken, and biblical scholars around the world could finally study them. Alleging that the publication of 4QMMT by Shanks had caused him a loss of earnings and mental distress, Professor Qimron filed a lawsuit in the Israeli courts in 1992 against the Biblical Archaeology Society and Shanks. As editors, Robinson and Eisenman were also named as defendants. The trial was held in the first week of February 1993 in the District Court of Jerusalem. Attorney Amos Hausner, the son of Gideon Hausner, the prosecution of Adolf Eichmann, represented Dr. Eisenman. Amos Hausner wanted me to testify that Professors Eisenman and Robinson had both objected to inclusion of the publisher's foreword. Dr. Eisenman prepared an airline ticket, and I traveled to Jerusalem and checked into the guest house at the Christ Church within the Old City. It was late in the evening on the final day of the trial, and I was the concluding witness in the case, called on behalf of Professors Robinson and Eisenman. The last question to me on cross-examination was the identity of my client. I declined to answer. Although I had been testifying in English, the judge, and attorneys lapsed into Hebrew, as Professor Qimron's counsel urged the judge to compel me to answer or to be imprisoned for contempt of court. I was relieved when Judge Dahlia Dorner said that the hour was late and she didn't believe the answer was all that relevant. Inasmuch as I had just admitted judicially that I had contracted for the publication of the facsimile edition, and since I could be easily served as a defendant as long as I remained in Israel, we decided it would be best if I caught the next airplane flight out of the country. As can be seen from the footnote, I later returned. Ultimately, Herschel Shanks and the BAS were forced to pay $40,000 in damages, $60,000 for court costs, plus Qimron's attorney fees. During the year following the trial, as a matter of personal interest, I researched and wrote a 1,000-page brief on the history of monotheism generally and the ministry of Jesus specifically. My goal was to access and combine in one file the most up-to-date information provided by the Gnostic Gospels, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and other ancient manuscripts, along with the latest discoveries in biblical archaeology, to ascertain the basic facts as best they could be determined at the time. I concluded that the scrolls we published were probably the remains of the library where Jesus actually studied to prepare for his ministry. It was a rare and beautiful snowstorm in Jerusalem during the trial, and I resolved to return someday to where I had stayed. On Valentine's Day, February the 14th, 2000, my wife, Helen, and I were married in Christ Church across from the Citadel within the walls of the old city. She is my best friend, my editor of last resort, the helpmate of my existence, and my spiritual companion in all that awaits us. There is no better place to think and write than in her garden. And Helen, a truly gifted artist, says, "Those who create do not destroy." The title of the brief I prepared, Mary, Mother of Israel's Messiahs, was based on an expectation of 3 different Messiahs by the group known as the Way of Righteousness. The conclusion was that Jesus was most likely the suffering Son of Man Messiah. His brother, James the Just, had been the priestly Messiah, and his twin brother, Judas Thomas, who established a spiritual dynasty of the Way in the Middle East, was the Davidic leader Messiah. In addition to the roles played by Jesus and his brothers, the brief explored the Gnostic ministry of Mary Magdalene in identifying her presentation of the Spirit of wisdom as the true Holy Spirit. Intriguing as these findings were, I had to get on with my life, so I printed out the brief and placed it on a bookshelf in my study where it gathered dust. A number of books about the Gnostic Gospels, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and new discoveries in biblical archaeology have been written in the 26 years that have now passed, and I have followed these developments with great interest, searching always for the most logical interpretation of the documentary and archaeological evidence. Historian Neil Asher Silberman published The Hidden Scrolls, Christianity, Judaism, and the War for the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1994. In his book, Silberman detailed our efforts to publish the suppressed scrolls and presented a well-balanced interpretation of the community believed to have written the scrolls. In 1996, Dr. Eisenman published James, the Brother of Jesus, the key to unlocking the secrets of early Christianity and the Dead Sea Scrolls, to both public acclaim and the professional derision of orthodox biblical scholars whose fundamentalist views he challenged. Following near death from full-body sepsis several years ago, I resolved to bring to publication my writings about the various matters that have occupied my thinking over the years. My memoir, The Holocaust Case, Defeat of Denial, came out in July 2015, and later that year I published the Book of Mankind and 4 other philosophical and political policy books. In February 2016, I decided to condense my original research manuscript into a book that tells as accurately and simply as possible the true story about the original way of righteousness and how it had inspired Christianity, Rabbinic Judaism, and Islam. Following the prologue, the way of righteousness is divided into these parts. The origin of the way is an essential background about the land of Palestine, Israel, its people, their religions, and the books they produced. The growth of the way reviews the historical narrative commencing about 200 years before the life of Jesus and examines the social, political, and religious conditions of Palestine, Israel in the period preceding the birth and ministry of Jesus. Perfecting the Way examines the essence of Jesus' ministry, particularly its Gnostic and Eastern elements, and presents the gospel of Jesus, or Yeshua. The Remnant, of the Way documents the aftermath of Jesus' execution and the leadership of the Way by his brothers, James the Just, Simeon, and Joseph. The parting of the Way summarizes the evolution of Jesus' ministry into the Gnostic ministry of Mary Magdalene, the Christian church established by Paul, and the creation of Rabbinic Judaism. The Righteous Way of Islam examines the origin of Islam and its relationship to the ministry of Jesus taken to the East by his brother Judas Thomas. The Reconciliation of the Way reviews what has gone awry during the past 2,000 years, as these interrelated religions have become increasingly fundamentalist and have sought to destroy and eliminate each other. The last chapter identifies the commonality of these religions and searches for the true nature of their shared God in order to reconcile their beliefs and to reunite their believers. The Way Forward describes how the young people of the world can save their future. Following the epilogue are the Summations. These are 3 papers I wrote after completing the epilogue. A true story about an amazing family, a summary petition to the United Nations on behalf of the children of Palestine and Israel, and the nature of the abiding mind. Also included is an autobiographical summary of my professional life. The Way organizes about 200 brief papers and stories, the titles of which were devised to be read as a summary of the Way in the table of contents. This prologue and the epilogue tell the story about the author and how the Way came to be told. Now, almost 40 years after first watching the morning sun rise over the Mount of Olives and shine down upon the ancient walled city of Jerusalem, I believe I finally understand the thought that occurred to me as I looked at the rooftops. All those who worship therein believe in the same God, and, upon careful reflection, they should not expect justification for hating, oppressing, or harming others for having a different interpretation of their common belief. Irrespective of the strength of our own faith, none of us can possibly know for certain whether our own religious belief is valid until after the light of our physical existence has been extinguished and we can finally see for ourselves if the expectations of our faith are realized. In all I have done, ever since that long summer at the beach during which I resolved to use my legal training to act as Jesus would want me to, including this present work, I have striven to analyze and present the facts I uncovered to the best of my abilities, and as fairly as possible. Much like a legal brief, I have tried to let the quoted text and other evidence speak for themselves, and I have limited my own observations. It has been a remarkable and interesting journey along the way, and what is most amazing is what is yet to come. If it could be that I am granted 20 more years in which to live my life to the fullest, then I shall depart from here just before my century expires, well satisfied with the experience and filled with the love and joy of those with whom I have shared my time in life. You are one of the 7.5 billion people living in the world today, and the way of righteousness was written for you, for each one of you. It may not be lengthy enough or include adequate arguments to convince those who are unable to reconsider their religious convictions, but it may give the fair-minded faithful some pause for reflection. The Way should have a greater appeal for those, of every faith or none, who have a genuine curiosity about the past and a thirst for knowledge. The truth is always far more interesting than fiction, no matter how well written or based on the best lies ever told. What one believes, even most earnestly, must always be subject to the test of reality. Otherwise, the way forward is obstructed by the lies and distortions of the past and present. The Way was primarily written for Jews, Christians, and Muslims to help them better understand their own religion and that of the others who seem to be competing, like insecure children, for the attention and favor of their common progenitor God. The most insecure and rigorous fundamentalist in each of these faiths may reject out of hand and refuse to read anything said here that threatens their deeply held beliefs and convictions about God, the origins of the universe, and life here on earth. Others, however, may find comfort in an understanding of the theological foundation of the religions they practice that is not in contradiction to the knowledge and science that illuminates the reality of the world we all live in today. A belief in a caring and nurturing collective consciousness has occupied the thinkers in each of these religions, as they too contemplated the books and science of their times and imagined a spiritual and comforting God of mind. They referred to it by many names in their efforts to describe a peace of mind that comes from an acceptance of reality. No matter how torturous and threatening the times might be, to find the freedom of mind and time to think about how it might be in an alternative future of peace, harmony, justice, and joy. An abiding mind, an understanding of which is a goal of all who seek self-awareness in life, provides an ethical basis by which to live our daily lives. It encourages us to work for a future in which our children soar through the stars instead of dying out with most of other life on earth in a great extinction. As a practical matter, this ethical standard can be experienced by simply living a peaceful life of righteousness, the essence of the way. It is not the intent of this book to attack or diminish any religion or practice. It is offered solely to help the believers of every religion to better understand and appreciate their own faith and to respect that of others. There is value in having a spiritual life in the understanding and acceptance of the perils of life, but there is no justification in denying the essential right of others to practice their own faith in a different manner. At the core of all religions is the quest for peace and justice to ensure the well-being and survival of our children. No other logical or spiritual lesson can be derived if we look at the essence of our religions rather than at the exceptions that have been created to justify the horrible crimes, violence, and wars committed and justified for the sake of their God, however defined. The value in spiritualism is that it helps us to cope with that which we seek to comprehend, but have not yet the means or knowledge to see and understand. At that point, our faith takes over and helps us to imagine what and who most reasonably awaits us over the horizon and through the unseen adjoining dimensions that exist side by side with and within us. On a more personal level, a spiritual belief allows us to imagine what, if anything, remains when we reach the end of our lives and discover for ourselves what lies beyond the grave. A sense of spiritualism also helps us to accept our inability to comprehend the unimaginable power of an abiding mind that has been continually learning, expanding, and creating since before time and eternity were ever imagined by mind. Our children are the font of knowledge, for it is the children always who learn new things we did not know. The fruit of wisdom is creativity, and its harvest is an abiding mind, which is the guide of our consciousness. Gnostics refer to the inner voice of an abiding mind as the spirit of wisdom, which came to be known in Pauline Christianity as the Holy Spirit. Especially for young people who are coming of age in this new millennium, the Way provides a vision with which to view our accelerating and ever-expanding universe of light and to see beyond its boundaries into the endless energy of eternity. Never in human history has there ever been a generation so challenged as the one being born today, and the millennials who are coming of age to confront the realities of this time of common peril. These generations will either lead our progeny outward to the stars, or else the children of these generations will be among the last to die in the flames of war and atmospheric warming. It is into the capable hands and intelligent minds of these generations that we are now placing the most terrible weapons of war, which have the power to instantly and totally destroy the vast and wonderful store of human creativity accumulated over tens of thousands of years. Or we can empower our young people to travel through the stars, searching for warm water planets with large yellow moons to churn their oceans, the cradles of mankind and the way of righteousness, watched over by an abiding mind speaking as the spirit of wisdom. There are few tomorrows left remaining for this choice to be made. Evolution or extinction, the moment is upon us. Abiding mind, surveyor of the universe, timekeeper of eternity, curator of creativity, witness our works, hear our thoughts, and illuminate our way to knowledge, wisdom, justice, peace, and joy. Epilogue. What happened after the Way of Righteousness was written? I completed a final draft of the Way of Righteousness to this point on September the 2nd, 2017. Having done all I could to document the true history of the Way, it was my best effort to analyze and present the evidence and to argue the concluding concept of a comforting, abiding mind as a rational expression of the judgmental Creator God many people no longer believe in. The philosophical purpose of my effort was to reconcile the three major Abrahamic religions with the reality of their shared history, as revealed by the miraculous discovery 75 years ago of books hidden 2,000 years ago, subsequent archaeological findings, and a common recognition of the image of God as the collective consciousness and creations of an abiding mind. I set aside the manuscript of the Way, but I used it as an intellectual springboard to bounce beyond its concept of a spiritual and metaphysical definition of God as an abiding mind to a realistic consideration of an abiding mind as a proposition of scientific reality. I spent the next week or so thinking about the actual mechanics of such a quantum physical mind and the expanding universe of light we inhabit. I wrote up a little paper that looked beyond the spiritual and philosophical aspects of the Way of Righteousness to an examination of mind within the negative energy and its role in creating the positive reality of our universe of mass and light. Reality intruded. and I could no longer ignore the mind-boggling political carnival and its gaggle of immoral hucksters peddled to the American people in the 2016 election sideshow. I laid aside the manuscript of The Way and the paper on Mind and on my study credenza, and I turned my attention once again to the political madhouse in Washington, D.C. Over the last decade, since my retirement, I had refined my political thinking from a generalized concept of a peaceful political evolution to drafting a specific and comprehensive Voters' Bill of Rights as a constitutional amendment to remedy all of the issues that are destroying the faith of most Americans in their representative government. The Voters' Bill of Rights serves as a focal point for creative strategies across the political spectrum. People working together in a peaceful transformation of the United States government into one that is more caring and respectful of those who elect it. A California nonprofit corporation, USVRA.US, was established to educate the public about the United States Voters' Rights Amendment, to provide an essential background and explanation of the amendment. I wrote, and the corporation published, Transforming America, a Voters' Bill of Rights, to explore whether the essential principle of the USVRA, allowing people to make their own political policy, could be adopted by voters in other countries. I wrote and published An Essential History of China, Why It Matters to Americans. Attempting to present a comprehensive set of political policies in an easier-to-read format, I wrote and published SAM, A Political Philosophy. As a fact and policy-based collection of practical policies narrated by fictional characters, SAM combines political heroism with an inspiring and poignant love story. For the last 5 years, I've been working with students and professors in the political science departments of my local university and city college to establish an organizational framework of Youth for the Voters' Rights Amendment, Y4VRA, capable of being activated on every American campus. I wake up early most mornings and use these quiet hours to do my best writing, and around daybreak, after sharing the morning news with Helen, I usually go to the YMCA for exercise. There, some years ago, I became friends with Mel Lindsay, a 92-year-old World War II veteran and retired preschool educator. He was interested in what I worked on, and I would often share with him what I had just written that morning. He read all of my published books and joined the USVRA.US Board of Governors. Following the 2016 election of Donald Trump and a stalemated Congress, Mel felt that he had been abandoned and that his government no longer represented him, and he wanted to do something about it. I helped him write a First Amendment petition for redress of grievances and his sworn declaration, to which he attached a bound copy of Transforming America as an exhibit. Helped by Y4VRA volunteers, Mel prepared hundreds of priority mail envelopes addressed to his local city council members, his state representatives, governor, to every member of Congress, every member of the presidential cabinet, every member of the Supreme Court, and to the president and vice president. The mass mailing at the postal annex was videotaped, and Mel appeared in several Facebook ads explaining his actions. Additional Y4VRA ads followed with videos of young people saying what they want and expect from their government, and starring their proud mascot, Trusty Rusty the Ranger Dog. A friend introduced me by mail to a young international and all-UK champion website designer in Wales, England. we first collaborated on creating a fully coded site for the Youth for the Voters' Rights Amendment at y4vra.org. Starting with a photographic slideshow of young protesters, the pages scroll down through short chapters and videos on all mobile devices. Facing the bad news of living under a cruel and corrupt government and a declining economy and polluted environment, Y4VRA provides a voice for young people to assert their fundamental rights of liberty and to reserve their consent to be governed. Its purpose is to provide information and an easy way for everyone to immediately cast an electronic vote, yes or no, on their voters' Bill of Rights in order to make a real difference in the 2020 election. Once y4vra.org was up and running, we replicated it at usvra.us, refocusing on the leadership role of strong women in managing the Voters' Bill of Rights campaign as it is self-organized by the young people of America. The USVRA incorporates the Equal Rights for Women Amendment, the ERA, and it ensures the complete equality of all women in all aspects of all political decision-making. I photographed and videotaped the Women's March in Los Angeles last year and again this spring, 2019. We used these images of women, particularly mothers and their daughters, in a series of photo essays running as Facebook ads for both usvra.us and y4vra.org. We republished WilliamJohnCox.com as a digital autobiography. The website is a comprehensive collection of all of my creative work, including books, articles, videos, models, and commentary. Almost all my published books are in print, but most can be downloaded for free in the lending library, and my films and videos can be viewed in the video library. In 2015, I published the Book of Mankind, a philosophy for the new millennium. Last year, we launched Facebook ads for the book on the internet, and we created an entirely new coded site at mindkind.info, depicting the book and its message coming out of a background of music and stars. Finally, the vote.io site was coded to serve as a digital ballot box for an ongoing electronic poll on the Voters' Bill of Rights by the American people. As we declare our rights of liberty and reserve our consent to be governed. The vote will close at midnight on Election Day, November the 3rd, 2020, at the dateline of the last U.S. territory in the western Pacific Ocean. As a result of Mel's mass petition to his government, one congressman returned the book saying he didn't accept gifts, and the Secretary of Education's office sent a letter acknowledging receipt. That's it. I then drafted my own legal pleading to the U.S. Supreme Court in the form of a petition for writ of mandate. In it, I declared our personal 9th and 10th Amendment rights of liberty as a defense against our government that has become corrupt, ineffective, unrepresentative, and threatening. I reserved my consent to be governed as a censure of the entire existing government until the American people can vote on their voters' Bill of Rights. I wrote and printed the petition, flew to Washington, D.C., and personally delivered a box containing the required number of bound copies to the U.S. Supreme Court. My petition was rejected by the clerk for defects in form. I corrected the errors to the approval of the clerk. However, at the direction of the Chief Justice, the clerk refused to accept a filing from any individual on a matter of original jurisdiction. This, without any consideration of my argument to the contrary, as a reserved and essential right of liberty. I then mailed personal letters to the justices serving each of them with a copy of the pleading as a First Amendment petition for redress of grievances. There was no response. By this time, a year had passed since I had laid aside the Way manuscript to engage in the insanity of politics. In September of 2018, I became depressed about the absolute lack of result from everything we had done over the past year. Energy spent. I spent a month doing nothing but reading junk books, watching Netflix documentaries and docudramas, and eating ice cream. Having sufficiently indulged my depression and becoming bored, I sought the pleasure of a project to occupy my mind and to lift my depression. I picked up and reread the little 5-page paper on mind that had laid dormant for a year. I imagined it would be interesting, and not too difficult, to expand the paper into a little book about mind, our universe, quantum physics, measuring, and counting, as a sequel to the Book of Mindkind in the Mind series of little books. I drafted papers about our universe of light, an abiding mind that contemplates it, and its language of quantum physics, measuring and counting. I organized and circulated a collection of the papers by email to the faculty, graduate students in the physics, mathematics, and computer science departments at the top 25 technical universities in the world. Profiting from the limited response, I completed a final draft and published Mind and Its Language of Reasons in print and digital formats on May the 1st, 2019. With the better understanding provided by working through the papers on Mind, I was able to go back to work on The Way, which lacked only an epilogue and original photographs. My son Stephen, a photographer and graphic artist, and I planned an adventure to complete the book. We flew to Israel during the first weeks of June 2019 and photographed selected locations for a photo essay and maps to illustrate the book. With official permission, we photographed at Caesarea the ancient caves at Mount Carmel, the Megiddo Tell, the Zion cornerstone of the Temple Mount, the citadels of Jerusalem, the walls of Jericho, the Jordan River, the caves, ruins, and cemeteries at Qumran, and the last stand at the Masada fortress by the Zealots, who followed the way of righteousness. We were able to capture the moment of sunrise over Jerusalem from the top of the Mount of Olives. We got good images at all sites, and we returned home safely. Having flown home through 11 time zones, I remained on Jerusalem time for several weeks. Rising very early, I completed the epilogue and worked on its photo essay with Steve, as he also completed the maps and charts. The following 15 images are a survey of the stones left standing from almost 2,000 years ago, serving as mute monuments to empire gone mad. Imagine the Roman destruction of Jerusalem, down to Herod's citadels, and how the Romans relaxed from the battles at the Caesarea arena, enjoying the Herodian slaughter of the zealot children of the way of righteousness. Bear witness to the murders of the sons of Mary, Simeon and Joseph, the priest of the sons of Zadok, and the order of Melchizedek, and Jesus, Judas, and James, the Messiahs of the way of righteousness. Sunrise over Jerusalem. The Mount Carmel caves. The walls of Jericho. The gates of Megiddo. the water tunnel at Megiddo, the Isaiah scroll recovered from Cave 1 at Qumran, Cave 4 high on the cliffs of Qumran, the ruins of Qumran, the Mount Zion corner of the Temple Mount, the Jordan River, the cemeteries of the Osim at Qumran, the most likely burial site of Jesus, his brothers James the Just and Simeon, and their mother, and their father, and their sister, and others who walked with them on the way of righteousness. The amphitheater at Caesarea by the sea. The twin citadels of Herod's palace in Jerusalem. Titus's Arch of Triumph in Rome, celebrating the destruction of Judea. The floor of the Zealots' assembly room at the Masada fortress. Lingering on these images, we can go back in time thousands of years to when the stories of the way were being played out. We can visualize the large Osim library carved out of the stone cliffs as Cave 4 at Qumran, large enough for shelves to hold 1,000 books, and where Jesus and his brothers, James and Simeon, studied the way of righteousness 2,000 years ago. Can we imagine the debates of the boys and the languages they used? We can gaze across the ruins of the ancient desert refuge of the Osim, those who were doers of the law. Beyond, we can see the simple, unmarked graves in the cemetery, high above the shore of the Dead Sea. This is where the bodily remains of the followers of the way of righteousness were laid to rest under piles of stones, as their minds and souls were freed for all of eternity, not only as spirits among the weathering stones, but everywhere they are remembered. It is here, if anywhere on earth, the bodies of Mary and her sons, Jesus, James, and Simeon, may rest, alongside others who walked and lived the way of righteousness. After returning from Israel, I quickly completed the epilogue and photo essay, and I awoke one morning and was able to write a summation of the historical essence of the way of righteousness, and telling the true story about an amazing family. A few days later, a similar need compelled me to write the summation paper on the nature of the abiding mind and to focus on the grave and immediate climatic danger of global warming. The paper is a word bridge between the ending of the way of righteousness and the beginning of mind and its languages of reason, summarizing and connecting the theories of mind in the two books with the reality of our existence. I then found there cannot be a satisfactory ending of the way without resolving a final critical issue. As our jet plane climbed and banked out of Israel, I carried with me, not on film or in our computers, but in my mind, a wretched image of inhumanity that later made me weep when I first read what I had written about it below. Somehow, before I'm done with the way, I must do something to relieve the suffering I witnessed. As Steve and I drove behind Israel's great concrete wall down into the wilderness valley of the occupied West Bank and the Jordan River, we witnessed nothing but hopeless, desperate, and grinding poverty in and around the hills of Jericho. Any fair-minded comparison to the prosperity and affluence of nearby cosmopolitan Western Jerusalem is necessarily devastating to the legitimacy of any government and its leaders responsible for the military occupation of Palestinian land in violation of international law for more than half a century. The sight of forgotten and angry children with nothing to do is seared on the retina of my mind, and I cannot ignore it or forget it. I am once again compelled to act, seeking legal protection for these poor, legally forgotten, and defenseless children. Almost 40 years ago, I defended the honor and memory of the Jewish children who were gassed and burned in the Holocaust against a gang of American neo-fascists who denied that the Nazis had operated gas chambers. In memory of the Nakba, I wrote a petition for constitutional protection of the universal rights of liberty of all children in the ancient land, including the children of Palestine, whose bloodlines run true to the lands of Israel and Canaan, with only stones to throw in defiance of the great concrete wall erected by the state. Whole generations of desperate Palestinian children have lived and died in abject poverty without legal rights or remedy, justice or hope. These Palestinian children not only suffer from humiliating hunger and poverty, surrounded with weapons of war and guarded behind walls and fences, but they're being bombed into submission by the warplanes and technological might of a nuclear and cyber power which has militarily occupied their ancient ancestral homelands for more than 50 years. With little to live for and nothing to fear, Palestinian children have willingly charged the wire fences of Gaza, rolling burning tires and daring to be shot down or crippled by Israeli snipers in acts of fatal futility. These children offer up their lives in an ultimate submission to their Islamic faith in Allah, their God of Abraham. The ancestral religion of the ancient land, the way of righteousness, is rooted, along with its progeny, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, in the original covenant Abraham made with Melchizedek at Jerusalem, as Abraham sought entry into the ancient land of Canaan. As recorded in Genesis, Abraham pledged on behalf of his family that they would peacefully live a life of righteousness so long as they sojourned in the land of Israel. Thus the question, is the present government of the State of Israel acting with righteousness toward the people it purports to govern, both the children of Palestine and the children of Israel as well? Although declared to be in existence and a member of the United Nations for more than 70 years, the State of Israel has yet to create a written constitution defining the rights of the people it purports to legitimately govern. Nor has the state obtained the consent of the people to be subject to the laws it promulgates. For its basic law, the justice courts of the state continue to rely on the English common and martial law inherited by the state from the British Army in 1948. The creation of a children's constitution would embody Abraham's essential covenant of peace and righteousness in the ancient land in a secular document enshrining these essential principles. The covenant would include every person with a blood right to the ancient land and every person whose religious beliefs derive from the covenant of Abraham. The Children's Constitution would include all Israeli citizens, more than 40% of whom are not religious, and all the people of Palestine. The legality and power of the Children's Constitution would derive from the universal rights of liberty possessed by every person to live subject to a written constitution whose power derives from a collective consent to be governed, which can be reserved as a censure of bad government. Irrespective of a person's religion, a children's constitution based on Abraham's covenant would protect all of the children of Palestine and Israel, and it would engender a peaceful society of freedom, law, and justice, where the universal rights of liberty of every person includes the ability to peacefully practice a religion of choice or not. The manuscript was formatted, and 50 bound copies were printed. They were distributed at the end of August in a mailing by mi amigo and lawyer Luis Casillas Robles. The mailing list included the Secretary General of the United Nations, the President and Chief Rabbis of Israel, the Palestinian Authority, Pope Francis, the Dalai Lama, and the World Council of Churches, among others. At 659 pages, The Way of Righteousness is a big book. To spare those who have less interest in history and documents, a collection of the Epilogue, Prologue, Photo Essay, and Summations was published as the third in the Mind series of little books. Mind, Before and After, will be an electronic ebook for free, or it will be printed as a small 5x7 black and white paperback. An audio-visual reading of the concluding summation on the abiding nature of mind was transcribed into a YouTube video featuring years of photographs of protest, including the recent climate strike. My next, and hopefully last, writing task is to complete the fifth and concluding little book of the Mind series, The Choices of Mind, Extinction or Evolution. I briefly addressed the criticality of the environment in the Abiding Mind summation, but I was barely able to touch on the subject. There are stacks of books on the environment, economy, and governments waiting on my credenza to be read and summarized if I'm to actually write the book instead of just thinking about writing the book. Or, as we say in Texas, I'm a-fixing to write The Choices of Mind. I wake up most mornings increasingly concerned about the growing intensity of immediate and deadly dangers, and I search through each day seeking simple solutions to these difficult problems. This I will continue to do as best I can for as long as I am able. The overall goal in most of my writing, including The Way of Righteousness, is to derive relevant and practical policies and courses of action to resolve complicated and interrelated problems. Alternative choices provide opportunities which allow for more effective decisions, thus better ensuring the future of our children. Working together, we can make a difference in their tomorrows. We must confront the reality of human extinction within the next half-century, resulting from the violent and destructive changes in our worldwide climate we are now witnessing, if we are to continue to abuse Earth's atmosphere and water by pumping out carbon dioxide and fouling our habitat with chemical garbage. We are not alone in this universe, but on this spinning sphere of dirt and water, fire and ice, we share. Each of us must find our own path forward every day, making the best use of our minds to make good rather than bad decisions. Such is the way it is. Summations. A true story about an amazing family. About 2,000 years ago, a truly amazing family lived in northern Israel, which was ruled as a police state by the incestuous Herodian monarchy at the sufferance of the Roman Empire and its occupying army. The roads in the Galilee were lined with the crucified corpses of partisan fighters, left to rot by the Romans as stinking examples of the futility of resistance to the empire. Living with the daily terror, the family followed the way of the Osim as simple doers of the law, who peacefully lived lives of righteousness throughout the land and diaspora. The Osim built a refuge in the desert at Qumran by the shore of the Dead Sea, where they sought solitude to study and reflect upon their books that promised not one, but three Messiahs, a suffering Son of Man, a Davidic leader, and a priestly Messiah, all of whom would come to rescue the people from the evil monarchy and empire that ruled their lives. Cleopas, the father of the Galilean family, was a Rechabite who traveled to find work as a carpenter, while the mother, Mary, delivered and raised 5 sons and a daughter. Her firstborn were twins, Yeshua, Greek, Jesus, and his identical brother, Judas. The twins became 2 of the 3 expected messiahs of the Osim, and the next of Mary's sons, Jacob, Greek, James, became the 3rd Messiah. At their births, Mary and Cleopas dedicated the firstborn of her twins, Jesus, and the following 2 of their sons, James and Simeon, as Nazarites. The boys were raised to live every day of their lives, from birth to death, as being holy unto the Lord. At age 10, the brothers were consecrated to prepare for the alternative priesthood of the Osim, the sons of Zadok. The brothers came to live in isolation at Qumran, to seek wisdom in its libraries, self-identity during solitary reflection, and to experience the vision of the path they would follow for the rest of their lives. After 20 years of study, first Jesus, then James, and then Simeon achieved intellectual maturity at age 30 and were ordained as priests of the sons of Zadok. They were prepared to teach the way of righteousness and to spiritually lead the people and their zealous sons of light in both war and peace. When the sun rose on their 30th birthdays, each brother left the security of the refuge and walked the harsh 29-mile winding path up through the wilderness hills and the village of Bethany to the gates of Jerusalem. Each must have fully contemplated the immense cruelty that awaited him and the risk of their journey that lay ahead. All 5 of Mary's sons died violently, sacrificed by their parents on the altar of eternal peace and fulfillment of their covenant of righteousness. The Osim simply abided by the basic law, according to the ancient covenant of Abraham, to peacefully live out each moment of life in righteousness. These doers of the law had no respect for the oral law of the Pharisees, nor could they tolerate the corrupt practices of the Sadducean priesthood, both of whom collaborated with and spied for the Herodians and their Roman masters in suppressing the people. The Osim and their way of righteousness rebelled in words and deeds against the brutal occupation. The war was fought by their zealot warriors, the sons of light. It was spiritually led by their priest, the sons of Zadok, and the wounded and widows were comforted by their lay ministers, the order of Melchizedek. As Jerusalem fell to the Roman army, and the children of the way were being rounded up throughout the land to be sold into slavery in the empire, or the most defiant were thrown to the wild animals in the amphitheater at Caesarea, by the Herodians and Romans in celebration of their victory. The Osim concealed their books in sealed jars within remote caves among the cliffs around Qumran. Their archives, including Cave 4, which was created by connecting the interiors of several adjacent caves located high up the face of a cliff across from the refuge. The Osim enlarged and squared out the cave behind the small entrances, which were accessible only by ropes and ladders. The large library provided shelf space to organize 1,000 scrolls and a peaceful place for young adepts to read, reflect, talk, imagine their futures, and to think about what each could do to contend with the evil power of empire. The zealot warriors of the Way continued to resist the Roman army, the mightiest in the world, even after Jerusalem and Qumran fell. The zealots retreated to Herod's massive desert fortress on top of the mountain at Masada, further south in the desert along the Dead Sea. Herod had been besieged at Masada by the zealots earlier in his rule, until he was rescued by the Roman army. He continued to expand his palaces at the fortress throughout his reign, but it was captured in a surprise attack by the zealots later in the war. After holding off the Roman army for 4 years, and as the gate was collapsing, the Sons of Light buried their last remaining books of the Way, drew lots, and died by their own swords, rather than by the weapons wielded by the ignorant hands of power and empire. Jesus became the suffering Son of Man Messiah, expected by the way of righteousness. He cleansed the temple, caused a riot, and he was arrested and summarily executed. Jesus sacrificed his life to save his people from the cruelty, corruption, and power of the Herodians and Romans. In doing so, he liberated his spirit so his words of righteousness would live on in the minds of all those who seek his truths. Judas, Thomas, Aramaic for twin, was not a Nazirite. Armed with a sword, Judas Thomas became the Osim's Davidic Messiah. He took the words of righteousness to the east, where the Way guided the Ebonite Christian kingdoms that existed there for hundreds of years. The influence of Judas the twin extended into areas of Syria, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, and finally India, where he was struck down by a spear and died with his sword in his hands. His letter of Jude concludes the New Testament just before Revelations, and his original Gospel of Thomas, revealed in the Gnostic Gospels, was later used in the fabrication of the Pauline Synoptic Gospels. Subsequent Roman emperors felt threatened by the lineal descendants of Judas the twin, whom they feared might create a unified Davidic kingdom in the Middle East. For more than 5 centuries, Judas's teachings were recited and taught in these lands, until finding eloquent expression in Saudi Arabia by the last prophet of Allah, Muhammad, and his Islamic message of righteousness. Mary's third son and second Nazirite was Jacob, or James, who became the priestly Messiah of the Osim. Following the crucifixion of Jesus by the Romans, James the Just led the way in the Zadok priesthood for 3 decades in Jerusalem and Qumran. His essential teaching is contained in the New Testament letter of James. As a righteous teacher of the way, and as a priest of the alternative Zadok priesthood, James the Just was elected by the people and the sons of Zadok to represent them as their high priest in the temple. For this heresy, a Pharisaic mob, led by the enigmatic Saul, threw James down the temple steps, breaking both of his legs. After recovering at Qumran and returning to Jerusalem, James was finally stoned to death near the Mount Zion cornerstone of the temple as a result of a conspiracy by the Herodians, Sadducees, and Pharisees, to whom James and the Way posed a threat to their power over the people. Following the judicial execution of James, his younger brother, the third of Mary's Nazareth sons, Simeon bar Cleopas, a Rechabite priest of the sons of Zadok, was elected leader of the Way. After the Romans leveled Jerusalem and were advancing to destroy Qumran, Simeon led the Qumran Osim into exile across the Jordan River. Other zealot sons of light remained behind to fight the Romans, and Simeon returned as their spiritual leader. He was ultimately captured and crucified by the Romans near Jerusalem. The youngest of Mary's sons, Joseph, who is also known in the New Testament as Josie or Barnabas, probably wrote the original book of Matthew before writing his letter to the Hebrews. The mission of Joseph the Comforter as a lay minister of the order of Melchizedek was to teach the words of righteousness to the Gentiles, to whom the order was open. It is said that Joseph was executed by the Romans on the island of Cyprus. This may be true, but some believe Joseph escaped to write the Gospel of John as a pseudonym in his old age. John combines Mary Magdalene's Gnostic teachings of the Spirit of wisdom in the West with the Way's word of righteousness at Qumran. The only known daughter of Mary was named Salome. She was present at Jesus' crucifixion, helped recover his body, and with others she accompanied it back to Qumran. There, she helped wash and wrap Jesus' body for burial. As his grave was being dug nearby and rocks were gathered to cover it, she lived on to care for her parents in their old age and to attend to their deaths. The bodies of Jesus, James, Simeon, and others of his family may still lie buried there, under piles of stones in the cemeteries of the Osim at Qumran, forgotten in the sun and rain for 2,000 years until now. Mary Magdalene, her sister Martha, and their brother Lazarus were followers of the Way. They lived in Bethany, near Jerusalem, east of the Mount of Olives, along the road coming up from Jericho and Qumran, as Jesus rested overnight on his way to cleanse the temple in certain death. Mary Magdalene anointed him to be the Way's suffering Son of Man Messiah. Mary was Jesus' favored companion in life, and she was the heir to his most spiritual teachings. Mary Magdalene took the Way's spirit of wisdom to the West. She and her Gnostic followers taught the enlightened message of Jesus, his way of righteousness, for hundreds of years throughout Egypt, Syria, Asia Minor, Greece, and into France. Gnosticism remained the prevalent study of the teachings of Jesus for more than 300 years until Emperor Constantine seized Roman power in the 4th century, and he designated the Church of Saul, in Rome as the empire's only lawful expression of Christianity. Mary is honored throughout the Gnostic Gospels as the one Jesus loved the most. How long she lived, how far she traveled, and how and where she died remain unknown. Some believe her remains may be buried somewhere in southern France. Mary's spirit of wisdom was freed. When the jars containing the Gnostic Gospels and the Dead Sea Scrolls were broken, and the written records of the distant past were revealed in our time to be read and considered, once again, after 2,000 years of silence. As the libraries of the Gnostics were being seized and burned by the Pauline and Empire authorities, 52 books were sealed in a large jar buried at the base of a cliff in Egypt near the Nile River. The books remained there, undisturbed, for 1,700 years until 1945. Within a year of the Gnostic Gospels being unburied in Egypt, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, also preserved in jars, in a cave at Qumran, a few hundred miles to the east. Less than 20 years later, other books of the Way were recovered from under the floor of the assembly chamber at Masada. The books had been buried there by the last of the Sons of Light in 73 CE. These courageous cultural and spiritual warriors of the Way defended their families, their books, and their rights of liberty to live their own lives in simple peace and righteousness. Their resistance was crushed by the cruel and ignorant power of empire, which has continued to compete for world domination for 2,000 years. Until now, when the righteousness of the lives of these spiritual warriors truly lived as they fought for peace were revealed by the books they read and wrote. The bravery of these children of light can inspire us to once again confront the evil of empire, the stupid wars they fight, and the children they kill. A summary petition to the United Nations. On behalf of the children of Palestine and Israel, this summary petition seeks the just remedy of a written constitution for the children of the ancient lands of Palestine and Israel. It is proffered for consideration, resolution, and vote by the General Assembly. Should the United Nations conduct a written plebiscite throughout Palestine and Israel, asking everyone over the age of 18 if they consent to a covenant of a constitution for the children, empowered by their universal rights of liberty and based on the legal principles of peace and righteousness? Yes or no? Should the United Nations plebiscite include a separate and simultaneous vote by the same people, first, collectively, for the children's constitution to serve as the supreme law of the ancient land, and then separately? The Israelis to vote yes or no for the calling of a national convention of the people of Israel to establish a written constitution for the state of Israel with its capital in West Jerusalem. The Israeli Constitution should acknowledge perpetual peace with the state of Palestine within its pre-1967 boundaries, and the subordination of the Israeli Constitution to the Children's Constitution, which ensures the rights of all Palestinians who legally reside within the state of Israel to pass, live, work, and worship in peace. The Palestinians to vote yes or no for the calling of a national convention of the people of Palestine to establish a written constitution for the state of Palestine with its capital in East Jerusalem. The Palestinian Constitution should acknowledge perpetual peace with the state of Israel and its subordination to the Children's Constitution, which ensures the rights of all Israelis who legally reside within the state of Palestine to pass, live, work, and worship in peace. A reading of a brief summation about the nature of an abiding mind. Pausing here to gather our thoughts, we can try to make sense of the abundance of evidence presented thus far in this examination. The book of the Way of Righteousness, a revealing history and reconciliation of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, now numbers about 650 pages and weighs several pounds. For those who might want to read something less heavy about how the Way was written, a collection of the prologue, the epilogue with photo essay, and the summations, including this concluding reading, has been published in the Mind series as Mind Before and After the Way of Righteousness. It is available in color, as an ebook, and as a black and white paperback. What questions remain to be asked? What words or best said in summation, what will be the verdict? Are we prepared to postulate a theory, one to be assumed, yet vigorously and rigorously examined? Is mind something valid we can trust in and build upon as an intellectual tool to aid us in our eternal search for truth? What is the reality of our own minds and our collective community of human minds? Beyond that, what are the probabilities of a greater, eternally observing, universal consciousness and abiding mind? Mind exists independent of our physical reality, and it is invisible to the means by which we measure mass and light. Mind observes the fragile waveform of matter and light we are a physical part of, but mind is forever beyond our technical ability to detect and measure. Mind is, however, a demonstrable factor of physical reality, for without mind, there is no reality of existence. Without minds, we would not appreciate the garden within which we live, and these written words would not exist. We would not exist, and there would be none of you to read these words. And to please listen carefully within your minds to these last few concluding thoughts. These are the best words I can conceive to speak, echoing within your own mind where you seek the truth. There is an abiding mind which has existed for all of eternity, ever since mind was first born of intelligence as a natural process of life. Everything that has ever lived evolved from mass, itself having been physically transmuted from energy in a natural quantum blip, manifested as this brilliant universe of light we call home. An abiding mind equates with eternity, existing in the negative nothingness that encompasses every positive particle we perceive and that has ever existed. It is only with the magnification and illumination provided by the imaginations and creations of our unified mind that we can escape the limits of this small spherical mass of earth and water, whose garden we live in and whose air we breathe. Focused together, our minds can see what lies beyond the rainbow spectrum of our universe of light. We can see its beginning, and we can witness its end. We can experience every moment in between, and we can always find our way home. Becoming aware, we transcend the physical bounds of our spatial reality, and it is then when we can experience the peaceful, loving, and motherly presence of an abiding mind. We can learn to listen to the inner voice of her spirit of wisdom as she herself patiently listens to every single one of us, all of the time, as we talk to ourselves within our minds. We must become fluent in her one-word language of truth, forego the art of the lie, and to trust in the wisdom of the words heard always as a voice of reason, our conscience, and our conscious being, if we are to ever access the limitless archives of an abiding mind. At the instant mind reaches out from within an infant's brain, in its singular quantum moment of mind, it is received within and swaddled by an abiding mind, much like the orbiting negative electrons surround and shield the positive nuclei of our atoms, or as the protective arms of a mother instinctively wrap around her children, defending them at all costs against danger. The child's mind is quantumly enveloped by an abiding mind, never to be separated, and shared forever with the mind of its mother. Mind is born in an instant. As the emerging child listens for the reassuring voice it has been hearing in the darkness of the womb, and it instinctively seeks to suckle at its mother's breast, knowing only its mother's voice and how to cry. It is soothed by her voice and sheltered by her arms. Nourished and comforted, the mind of the infant reaches out for the light it sees for the first time, and it instinctively seeks to touch and examine it. It is then that the spirit of wisdom, the soothing voice of an abiding mind, becomes at one with emerging embryonic minds in an instinctive search for the truth of the questions every child asks itself and others. A child's mind, programmed for truth, begins to learn other languages, some of which are infected with the malware of the art of the lie. When our life brain dies from lack of blood and oxygen, its mind, with all its memories, creations, truths, and basic lessons learned, exist on as eternal truths, as every singular mind remains integrated in a quantum sense with an abiding mind from birth, forward from its moment in life, mind, and time. More than that, the lingering spiritual presence of the essence of our physical being and our minds, our very souls, lives on in the minds and memories of those who survive us in life. We continue to exist so long as that we have created and contributed in life is valued and is worth remembering. The evolution of the instinctual intelligence of our twin brains at birth into our twin minds, one talking and the other listening, as they and we respond to the common problems of our life. Since we share the consequences of our actions, we share the essential need to consider effective alternatives in making wise decisions. This internal conversation takes place within the minds of all of us, consciously and subconsciously, all the time, from birth to death. There is myself and there is my conscience. The two of us who are destined to spend every moment of our lives together. We exist within the comfort, joy, and love we share with others, and we must live with the consequences of what we say and do along the way of life. Although history books do not always reveal the truth, print and electronic books are our collective attempt to accurately preserve the memories and times of our lives as a physical record of the reality of our existence. There are nuggets of truth to be mined from the written archives of the past and from the electronic news of the present, once we separate the outright lies. The truth is always the truth, and it is easy to remember. Lies remain lies forever, whether concealed, denied, or ignored. One word, truth, seeks peace and justice. The other word, lie, results in hatred, violence, and war. Lies and deceptions are not included in the language of truth, nor are they noted in the journals of an abiding mind. War is a truly evil word, describing the cowardly use of other people and remote weapons to kill other people, including children, while those who direct the killing are bravely shielded from injury. War is a word best forgotten. Perhaps, in the future history of our collective time of mind, the concept of war, in which people were once forced to kill for the benefit of their own selfish representatives and to die for the stupid mistakes of their own corrupt leaders, appears only as a footnote, a vestige of the latent human brainstem diseases of deception, hatred, and violence that was cured by the truth. History may record that one day the people reserved their consent to be governed as a censure of their existing government, and they took matters into their own hands. They voted in 2020 for a constitutional Bill of Rights, and together they changed the course of human history. The fruit of mind is self-awareness, a reconciliation between the two facets of our minds, resolving to tell the truth to ourselves when we think about how to deal with everyday life, family, jobs, and emotions. We become increasingly self-aware when making better decisions as we perceive the reality of our physical existence. We achieve the breadth of mind to use our knowledge honestly in seeking answers to questions beyond our present ability to ask. What is yet to be seen is much more magnificent than that which cannot yet be imagined. There is a magical moment when our minds come to accept the rigors of truth, first within ourselves, and then as a much more effective language with which to communicate with others, in comprehending our place and destiny in space, time, and eternity. The most important message for us to communicate to one another is the reality of mass extinction. Every creature on Earth, including we humans who caused the problems, face grave and deadly environmental and economic dangers right now. These threats are immediate and life-threatening, yet they are denied by those who purport to govern in the name of the people. Our representatives who are helpless to effectively govern with truth, dignity, and honor, burdened as they are by conceit, corruption, and deception, and made more weary every day by their deadly misuse of the political, cyber, military, and police powers entrusted to them by the people. The universal rights of liberty allow the people to reserve their consent as a censure whenever their government abuses its discretion and it endangers us, who it was created to serve. It is not us. This is the question each of us must ask ourselves here and now. Do we wish to survive and live, or to perish and die? That's the deal. There are no third choices, and it is now we must decide. We're all in this together. Either we all live, or else we all die. There will be no brave remnant to start all over again, irrespective of hidden guns and gold, for there will be no garden left to plunder, nor ammunition to buy. Books will serve as fuel until language and knowledge are lost, and nothing but the futile grunts of the last human is heard among the final few trees. We either abandon war forthwith and redirect all that mighty expression of intelligence, energy, technology, and vital human and precious material resources, presently being entirely and criminally wasted on weapons of war, in a positive and peaceful way to solve the deadly environmental and economic dangers now threatening all of humanity. There are things that can and must be done. Steps can be taken, and productive jobs can be done starting today. We must significantly retard atmospheric warming within the next 5 years, or else we cannot expect to foresee tomorrows much past mid-century. If these matters are not resolved by the 2020 presidential election in the United States, 4 more years of nothing will be far too little and far too late. One measure of our success in life, individually and collectively, is the ability to imagine how tomorrow should be and to take effective action today to make tomorrow happen as planned. An inability to shape the future is a failure, in that it requires one to constantly respond rather than to initiate. It is here and now that we will unite to learn, work, prosper, and create together to solve the immediate problems that are threatening the survival of humanity. Or we foolishly deny the truth and continue fighting stupid wars. In doing so, we will surely consign our own grandchildren to burn in a fiery hell of our own making, whether by the stupidity of our perpetual wars or by our failure to clean up the environmental, economic, and political messes we've created. The reality of a blisteringly hot earth with billions of people dying of thirst and starvation in the next half-century is much more likely than a news flash that an asteroid, the size of which hasn't been seen in 6 million years, will inevitably collide with Earth in 50 years. Given such a reality, what choice would we have but to tend to our garden, raise our children in peace and justice, and give them their chance to soar among the stars? Time is precious, and the clock is ticking. The difference of just a couple of degrees of temperature provide the delicate balance in the atmosphere and oceans of our fragile Mother Earth between extreme heat or extreme cold. The Arctic ice has moderated the temperature through regular cycles over millions of years. But the Arctic ice is now melting rather than expanding. At this point in the life cycle, things should be getting slowly colder over thousands of years, leading into a new ice age. Any reversal in this trend is catastrophic. These slight few degrees of heat, one way or another, will determine whether our grandchildren have a chance to evolve and to tour the lights of our universe as a graduation celebration someday, perhaps. Or they will all die, and we will become extinct. Even if our fossilized bones are the only thing left of us, amidst the forgotten ruins of our creations and the wreckage we have wrought, the memories and product of everyone who lived and worked here and now, the individual moments of each singular mind will continue to flow in the eternal tides of an abiding mind. If we fail to make a wise peace, and if we continue to fight stupid wars, only the most embryonic forms of life will survive the fires that will be fueled by our failures. It could take hundreds of millions of years for the soils, waters, and atmosphere of our Mother Earth to once again have the balance of health and energy to sustain life, to grow intelligence, and to sprout minds that instinctively reach out for the stars, just as babies seek their mother's breast. By nature, we are social, and we seek like-minded people to share joy, love, respect, and protection within our families and societies, as we each go about earning our own living and living our own singular way of life in concert with all who surround us. It is this wisdom of our collective human community of minds that is the intellectual reservoir of our strength as a people, and it is the source of our rights of liberty and their power of expression. We who live and think have the duty, will, and self-confidence to decide for ourselves what the future of our grandchildren should and will be like. And we want to live long enough to see it for ourselves. Even with everything I've studied, said, and done, the ultimate truth remains a mystery to me. Like all of us, I will only know for certain once my brain dies, my physical presence ends, and the existence of the mind it has wrought. The writer of these words will live on so long as there are those who read them.